Okay, well, we're at 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ginger Fiegel. I'm co-chair of the North Central Florida CISMA, or Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And this is the third Wednesday of the month, which means that it's our regular meeting time that the North Central Florida CISMA meets. And this time we do have a special guest speaking with us about water lettuce. And I'll introduce her in just one moment. But first, I do want to go through just some real quick business. We do have our water lettuce pool that is scheduled on the March 2nd. And for additional information on that, if you didn't receive the email that I just sent through the listserv, if you can contact Terry Graves, or if somebody could put my email or Terry's Graves email into the chat, you can contact with me and we can get you information for that event at Itchitepney Springs State Park. You do need to register in advance because logistics are going to be very dependent on the number of people that are assisting. So if you're interested in helping at that on March 2nd, please make sure you register. And for more information, email me or Terry Graves. And then also in the chat, which you can access at the bottom of your screen, the little message looking box. If you have any questions for our talk today, you can put them in there. And Ms. Paulette Tomlinson with University of Florida, she is going to be reviewing that chat box for us and keeping us posted on any questions that might come through that we can either discuss either during the talk or after Dr. Gettys completes her presentation. The other thing I do want to mention is that this is recorded, so it will be available on demand at a future date so that you can listen to the recording. And before I move on, are there any other topics that need to be discussed as far as the North Central Florida CISMA goes? We had an awesome event. I appreciate you, Miss Grace and Mr. John, for tabling our Great Invader Rally table at the Gainesville Air Potato Roundup. Certainly appreciate that. And John, I see you're here. Are you able to talk? Is there anything you need to add? You're on mute, or I mean, can't hear you. You're not muted, but we couldn't hear you. All right, I guess everything's good. We still can't hear you, but everything's good. I appreciate you being here. All right, well, we'll move forward. For those that are not part of our regular meetings, feel free to email us. Let us get you on the invite list. You were able to get on and register for this CISMA presentation. And these are the types of things we want to be able to provide to you every 3-4 months or so, in addition to our regular meetings. So please stay connected with us and we're happy to provide it. So for today, water lettuce, it's long been considered as an introduced species to one of the Florida's most intensively managed Florida plants. However, some researchers have suggested that the species may be native, which has impacted some of the management research. This presentation is going to provide us with the tools that we need to identify water lettuce, its current management options, and its arguments for both sides, whether it's native or introduced. Dr. Lyn Gettys is an associate professor of agronomy, which is the study of aquatic and wetland plant science. And she's been based at the University of Florida IFAS Fort Lauderdale Research Center and Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center in Davie since 2012. She holds a bachelor's degree in horticulture from the University of Florida, a master's degree in plant breeding from North Carolina State University, and a PhD in plant genetics from the University of Florida. Dr. Gettys' research is focused on the biology and ecology of native and introduced aquatic and wetland plants, as well as the evaluation of control methods for managing invasive species. So I certainly welcome you, Dr. Gettys, and we appreciate your time today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Ginger. That was an awesome introduction. I want to thank everybody for being here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Oh, that's not the way to do it, though, is it? Okay, so can you see my screen? Does everything look good? I'm gonna.
Looks good.
Yes, it looks good. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So yeah, we're going to talk all about water lettuce today. So first, let's meet the culprit. Water lettuce's Latin name is Pistia stratiotes. It's in the Araceae or the aroid family. It's a floating monocot species, and so it just it does have roots, but it floats along on the surface of the water and it's not anchored in place. Water lettuce can get up to 2 feet wide, and the individual leaves are up to a foot long, sort of scalloped in shape. They're thick, dull green, and they're sessile, meaning they don't have a petiole or leaf stalk. All of the leaves just attach together at the base. The roots attach to where the leaves attach, right at the crown, and the roots are light and sort of feathery in appearance. And water lettuce has very inconspicuous flowers, and the structure of the flower is typical of everything in the aroid family. We'll take a look at that in just a second. So here's a water lettuce. They're cute when they're small, right? I mean, that's my hand. I'm not a giant. So this is a fairly small, immature plant. But if you look down to the lower left and the upper right, you'll see that this little bitty plant that only has about 6 real leaves is already pupping or producing vegetative copies of itself. And this reproduces just about as quickly as water hyacinth. Both of these species can go from a single plant to an acre of surface coverage in about 4 months. So they're very productive. This is a more mature water lettuce, so they can get quite large. This one's a little bit beaten up, but that, happens out in the field. And this is that inflorescence that I mentioned. This is a spathe spadix structure, very typical of everything in the Araceae family. So this is related to the peace lilies and anthuriums and other landscape plants that you might be familiar with. So next, we'll talk about its distribution, its origin or supposed origin, and its legal status. Water lettuce is pantropical. It's been found pretty much everywhere in the world with the exception of Antarctica. So it has a very cosmopolitan distribution. It's considered cryptogenic, meaning they're not really certain where this plant originally arose. They just know that it's very broadly distributed. It's thought to be native to Africa, South America, and potentially the Southeastern United States, including Florida. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. Water lettuce is banned or classified as a noxious weed in a number of states, including Alabama, California, Connecticut, South Carolina, Texas, and Florida. But Florida also has water lettuce classified as a Class 2 prohibited aquatic plant. So this is a special group of aquatic plants that can be grown by nurseries that have gotten a permit from the state, but they can only be sold and distributed out of the state of Florida. And of course, they can't be sent to the banned or noxious states either. But that's because water lettuce is not super cold hardy. So most states in the country will not have water lettuce that persists and overwinters. It dies back in the winter. So we've got some arguments for water lettuce being native to the Southeastern United States. One of the points of evidence is Bartram's travels, and the other is fossil evidence. So first, we've got Bartram's travels. So William Bartram was a botanist who did a whole lot of botanical surveys in the 1700s. And one of the areas that he surveyed in Florida was Lake George. And in Lake George, he reported a plant that looked very similar to water lettuce. And so in this drawing, we have a kind of a suspicious looking plant down there below that lotus. And so Bartram reported that water lettuce was present in Lake George in the 1750s. And the suggestion then was, well, that it was native because he found it, but maybe not. There's other reasons or other ways water lettuce could have shown up in Lake George and other waters in Florida. So, for example, the Spanish had occupied St. Augustine 200 years before Bartram did his surveys. They brought in lots of different kinds of plant material, both in the form of dry ballast and as ornamentals, not just for landscape plantings, but also for water gardens. They also introduced things like orange trees. Orange trees are not native to Florida, even though Florida is known for oranges. So just because water lettuce was present doesn't necessarily mean that it had always been here. Another thing that's important to note is water lettuce was present in the Nile River more than 2,000 years ago. I mean, Dioscorides and Theophrastus, both very accomplished botanists of their time, reported that water lettuce was present then, and it's not thought to be native there. Water lettuce showed up in the hieroglyphics in Egypt. So this plant has been described in a number of different places throughout the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's native. Next, we've got the fossil records that suggest water lettuce might be native. This paper was published in 2013 in Conservation and Society journal. It's a really good journal. The author was really great. And basically, he provides biogeographic evidence and the conservation implications of what would happen if water lettuce was actually a native plant. And he provides some evidence to support that notion. And so here's a map of Florida from back in the day. And so they found fossil evidence from 3,500 to 12,000 years ago that water lettuce was present just north of Vero Beach a really long time ago. And then in Lake Annie in central Florida, just above Lake Okeechobee, they found fossil records that contained what looked like seeds of water lettuce from 7,000 to 11,000 years ago. Does that mean they're native? Well, not necessarily. Water lettuce shows up in the fossil records in just about every country in the world. For example, there are seeds that were recovered in Europe and Russia that suggested water lettuce was present there 23 million years ago. So it's been there a lot longer than it's been here. This is where water lettuce is found throughout the world. The gray areas are where the species is found now. You can see it's very cosmopolitan in distribution. They do note that the likely center of origin for the Pistia clade, which is the group of plants that water lettuce belongs to, is somewhere over here in the sort of Africa area. Over here, we've got a high diversity of specialist herbivores, and we'll talk more about them in just a little bit. But typically, where you have lots of specialist herbivores, you've got a plant that's probably native. So just because it's distributed throughout all of these different places globally does not necessarily mean that the plant is native to that area. So what about arguments for it being introduced? Those are our arguments for it being native. So we've got overly exuberant growth, which we all know all about. I was telling our host at the beginning that water lettuce is kind of considered a job security plant because we spend so much time managing it in Florida. And also another argument for this being an introduced species is a lack of co-evolved specialists in Florida. So first, let's look at that growth issue. In the 1950s, 125,000 acres of water lettuce were present in our aquatic systems. This is a substantial amount of plant material. So it's very, very aggressive growth, and it continues to this day. So for example, in fiscal year 2019 and 2020, the FWC invasive plant management section found water lettuce present in 259 public waters and occupied a total of 5,300 acres, which doesn't sound like that much, but they spent $4.2 million for maintenance control of floating plants. Now, it's important to keep in mind that's not just water lettuce, that includes water hyacinth as well. They're often sort of treated together and just kind of thrown into the bucket of floating plants. And by comparison, FWC and state money spent $15.3 million for all aquatic weed control in the state. So hydrilla's got a big chunk of that market, but water lettuce definitely holds its own. That maintenance control was performed on 25,000 acres of water. And so you look up above, I've already told you there's 5,300 acres of water lettuce. Well, it's pretty broadly distributed. You don't always find dense patches like you have in this picture that I've got on the bottom. Sometimes you have smaller areas. And so you don't necessarily have dense, complete coverage. And so for acres treated, it's actually about 25,000 instead of that 5,300 acres of plant material. So, okay, yeah, it's really exuberant with its growth, right? That automatically means it's introduced and invasive, right? Not necessarily. We have other species that we know are native, but they're pretty darn aggressive. The upper left picture is, boy, probably a combination of bladderwort and maybe some kabamba or fanwort. It can be a very aggressive submersed plant, but it's known to be native. In the picture on the bottom, that's Vallisneria or eelgrass. That's another native plant, and it's actually used quite a bit for restoration and habitat enhancement, but it can also be extremely aggressive and grow sort of exuberantly. We have floating leaved species as well that sort of exhibit aggressive behavior, but they're known to be native. So we've got Mexican water lily, Nymphaea mexicana on the lower left, and then spatterdock on the lower right. That's Nuphar lutea or Nuphar advena. These are both native, but they're both really aggressive. We have pickerel weed and cattail, emergent species that can grow very aggressively. And then we have frogspit, which is a native floating plant, but it can form problematic population densities as well. So just because a plant is introduced, that's not a guarantee that it's going to be invasive. And just because a plant is native, that's not a guarantee it's going to be well behaved. So we can't say that water lettuce is introduced strictly based on its aggressive growth, because we have other native species that are quite aggressive as well. So what about our other option for water lettuce being introduced? Our other argument is related to water lettuce's enemies. There are no co-evolved specialists in Florida that feed solely on water lettuce. For example, Alan Dre over at the USDA has published several papers on this topic. And so he's done a lot of work with water lettuce. He went to 61 different water bodies and collected 20 plants from each of those sites. And then he surveyed the insects on water lettuce from those areas. He identified 98 different taxa of insects. He found 13 of those were herbivorous, and 6 of them actually ate water lettuce, but they didn't eat water lettuce exclusively. They were polyphagous, meaning they eat a bunch of different species. Nothing was specialized just on water lettuce. Other work has found an additional 19 species that Dr. Dre didn't come across in his work, but those 19 species that fed on water lettuce were also polyphagous and ate bunches of different species as well. So what about the other side of the story? Well, okay, it's probably introduced. Well, you know, in Argentina, where it's thought to be native, there are 22 species that are polyphagous. They eat water lettuce and other species, but they're not specialized on water lettuce, despite water lettuce being native to that area. They found at least 7 different oligophagous weevils, and oligophagous just means, well, they eat a fair number of different species as well. And then in Central and South America, they found 13 different insects or critters that ate water lettuce and other species. So nothing was really specialized. And so one of the hallmarks that allows invasive or introduced species to become problematic in their new areas is called the enemy release hypothesis. And the logic is in their native range, they typically do have something that's co-evolved that only feeds on that one species. When those plants are brought to a new area, they usually come without those enemies that are co-evolved that eat them and keep them in check. So they're released from that enemy feeding pressure. So that's sort of more evidence that, well, maybe it's introduced, maybe it's not. But what it really boils down to is Florida's resource managers don't care where water lettuce is from. It's a hyper-aggressive grower. It's one of the world's worst weeds, not just the worst aquatic weeds, but one of the world's actual 100 worst weeds on land or in water. It's a super bad plant. It makes those dense populations, and we didn't really talk much about that because I know all of you already know this, but when it forms those dense mats on the surface of the water, it blocks the penetration of light and oxygen into the water column. When it blocks the oxygen penetration, that reduces dissolved oxygen, which creates really poor fish habitat. And when it blocks light penetration, it prevents any submersed plants from photosynthesizing, thus further reducing oxygen. But also it makes those submersed plants die out. And we end up just with a huge monoculture of water lettuce that's really poor habitat because our wildlife wants diversity and they need diversity. And they don't get it when they have something like water lettuce that's totally taken over an area. Another thing we don't talk about too much with water lettuce is that it's a mosquito host, not only just in the water that collects in the bowl or the crown of the plant, but there are certain species of mosquitoes that will colonize the roots of water lettuce. So it's an all-around bad plant. It's bad from an environmental perspective, and it's also bad from our perspective because we have mosquito habitat. And these large populations also interfere with our use of the water. So we have trouble with recreation. You can't get a boat with a prop through this. These bash into, bridges and various structures and can actually damage them because these floating mats are just so heavy and destructive. So what's in our toolbox? How do we manage water lettuce? Well, we've got a couple different tools in the toolbox, but drawdowns or dewatering is not one of them. So if you're familiar with drawdowns, basically you're removing all of the water from a system. This can be challenging for a number of different reasons. Most of our waters are multi-use, and so they're not just used for holding water and hosting these populations of invasive plants, but they're used for recreation. People fish, people jet ski, people swim. We use these systems to hold stormwater and drinking water. And so to dewater them is tough. If your system is being used for recreation, you have to convince your stakeholders to let you take that system offline for 6 months while you pull the water out of it. Then you've got to have somewhere to put the water. And then if you have a drought, you're in real trouble because you can't get that water back easily. But from a biological perspective, one of the main reasons that dewaterings and drawdowns don't work well for water lettuce control is that the seeds of water lettuce are actually spurred to germinate from a wet, dry, wet cycle. So if you do a drawdown, you'll probably knock out most of the living water lettuce in that system. But once you bring the water back up, those seeds will germinate and you'll very quickly have a new population of water lettuce. So unfortunately, we don't have any biocontrol options for water lettuce. And they actually were looking at some candidates that seemed to have pretty good promise and seemed to be pretty specific on water lettuce. But then that paper came out in 2013 saying water lettuce was a native species. We're not in the habit of looking for things to kill native species. So unfortunately, that work sort of ground to a halt. And I don't know what the status of it is now, but my understanding is there's not a lot of research going on to try to identify and evaluate other biocontrol critters for water lettuce that are host specific and only eat this one plant. Mechanical harvesting can be useful for water lettuce management. And I know y'all are having a water lettuce pull in a couple weeks. I hope you have a great time with that. That's going to be a lot of work. This stuff is heavy, as you know. And if you have a large population and you're trying to manage it using a mechanical harvester, as in this picture, there are a bunch of different constraints. So first of all, you've got to have that equipment, and these pieces of equipment are not cheap. They're pretty much custom made, so they're expensive. They take a long time to get. They tend to be large. They tend to be heavy, and you've got to have somewhere to launch them. So you've got this boat, this harvester, and you've managed to launch it and get it out on the water, and you're scooping up the plants, and that's great. But what are you going to do with them? You can't dump them along the shoreline in many cases. So in this picture, there's a residential area behind that harvester. They're not going to be able to take those plants, and those are actually water hyacinth. They're not lettuce, but same philosophy. They're not going to be able to just offload those in front of those houses. So that means they're either going to have another boat there that they're going to offload the plant material into, or they're going to have to go back to the dock and unload the plants there. Then they've got to take them to a landfill because nobody wants piles of rotting aquatic plants sitting around because they smell and they draw mosquitoes. And if you're landfilling any plants that you've harvested out of a lake, they're 95% water. So if you're paying tipping fees, you've got to keep in mind every 1,000 pounds of plant material you're throwing away is actually 950 pounds of water and 50 pounds of plants. So that gets expensive really, really quickly. Another thing to keep in mind is bycatch. So it's all good and well that you're scooping up the water lettuce here, but you're also going to scoop up any fish in the upper layer of that system, turtles, other critters, other plants. So that can be a challenge as well. So mechanical harvesting can be useful, but it has limitations. Most common method used to manage water lettuce in Florida is the use of aquatic labeled herbicides. And so we'll talk about some of those. Of course, just like our other tools, herbicides are not without side effects, right? So there's no silver bullet that's just going to kill the one plant that we're interested in and do no harm to anything else. But it's important to remember that aquatic herbicides have been labeled for use in aquatic system by the US EPA and by the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. And when they're used according to their label instructions, they do not cause undue harm to humans or the environment, which includes other animals, of course. So these are the most common herbicides that are used for water lettuce control in Florida. These are pulled from the 2020 NPDES report that FWC puts together. So they oversee all treatment of aquatic weeds in Florida. And so these are the products that were used by their contractors and at the rates that their contractors used and that are recommended by the label. But they're not a silver bullet, right? There's always the risk of off-target damage, usually to other plants. The products that we use for water lettuce control typically cause no harm to animals, but the bigger concern is our off-target plants and the natives that we want to preserve. So ideally, we have herbicides that are selective and efficacious. So if they're efficacious, they kill our target weed. And if they're selective, they don't do an unreasonable level of damage to our desirable native plants. So that's great. We know these herbicides, they're a known quantity. They've been around for a long time. But what about alternatives like, supposed natural herbicides? Well, There are things out there that are used as herbicides in some systems in the upland world for organic gardening and that sort of thing. And so we looked at a few of these products on water lettuce. That was actually spurred by the FWC pause in 2019, where FWC basically put a moratorium on aquatic weed control and had listening sessions throughout the state to get stakeholder feedback on aquatic weed management efforts. And so one of the things that came out of those listening sessions is that the public wanted managers to look at using non-herbicide products or non-chemical products for aquatic weed control. And so my lab got a multi-year project to do just that. The goal of this project was to evaluate the effects of acetic acid, which is basically really strong vinegar, and dilimonene, which is orange oil, alone and in combination. And we wanted to see what these did on invasive aquatic plants and also on desirable non-target aquatic plants. Not only that, but we wanted to look at the cost of using those products versus synthetic or sort of traditional aquatic herbicides. So we have a number of different species that we've looked at so far. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'll mention some of them once we get to the end. But since this is a water lettuce presentation, we're going to focus on some work that we did in fiscal year 2019-2020, where we looked at water lettuce as our invasive target plant. And we also looked at selectivity on pickerel weed, which was our desirable native non-target plant. And just sort of as something to keep in the back of your mind, in 2018, FWC spent $283,000 on dicot to control floating plants in Florida that year. So that's sort of our benchmark, and we'll get back to that later, but that's a number to keep in your head. What did we do for this? Well, we looked at 3 synthetic or sort of standard herbicide treatments. We had 3 concentrations of dicot, 0.5%, 1%, and 2%. And these were all surface sprays applied to foliage. And the dicot was supplied by Tribune because that's the brand of dicot that was most used by FWC in that fiscal year. We looked at 5 different concentrations of acetic acid ranging from 5 to 20%. That was supplied by 30% green gobbler vinegar, which is, again, really strong vinegar. We also looked at 4 different dilimonene concentrations ranging from 10 to 30%. And these were supplied by 100% technical grade pure dilimonene or orange oil, which smells delightful. We also looked at mixes of all of the different concentrations of acetic acid and dilimonene together. We also had an untreated control treatment where we just sprayed plants with water. And all of these treatments included a 1% by volume non-ionic surfactant to help with spreading and penetration of these treatments into the plant material. Let's look at how we did this. We did these experiments in 68-liter mesocosms. And that's just a fancy word for those 18-gallon rope handle tubs that you see at the big box stores. They're great for throwing the kids' toys in, but we use them an awful lot to grow aquatic plants as well. The emergent plants, and in this case, that was pickerel weed, were grown out on a greenhouse bench under overhead irrigation, and they were just potted in little 2-liter pots of sand, and we grew them out there, and they were quite happy. The floating plants, the water lettuce, were grown right in those mesocosms until the coverage of the surface of the water in each mesocosm was at least 80%. At that point, we healed in the potted pickerel weed plants and then treated everything in the mesocosm together. We had 4 replicates or copies of each of the treatments that we looked at. So that was a total of 80 of those mesocosms. And then we put out the treatments as a spray to wet treatment. And these are part of my crew. So on the right, we've got Joey, and Joey is actually timing the treatment that Kyle is putting out. So Kyle is actually spraying the plants in one mesocosm, and he has shields up around that mesocosm to prevent overspray from getting on the mesocosm right next to the one he's treating. After these plants were treated, we let them grow out for 8 weeks to develop symptoms and then to see if they were going to recover from those symptoms. At that time, we scored them for visual quality, which I won't be talking about because we just don't have enough time. But we also did dry weights on those, and we wanted to compare the dry weights of the treated plants to our untreated control plants. So let's see what that looked like. All right, these are the single product treatments. So just the diquat by itself, acetic acid by itself, and dolimonene by itself. All of the graphs that I'm going to show you are set up the same. So they've got a bold upper bar. That's the average or the mean of the untreated plants. And in this picture, that's the bar on the far left here. The bold bar about halfway down is a 50% reduction compared to that untreated mean. That's typically what we consider decent selectivity. So with a native plant, we can tolerate about a 50% reduction in growth compared to untreated plants. And then in the bottom rule is a 90% reduction compared to that untreated control plant. And so that is our sort of gold standard for a treatment that has good efficacy. So in this graph, basically the only treatment that was really efficacious on our water lettuce was our last two dolimonene treatments here. The 20 and 30% dolimonene both reduced growth by 90% or more compared to that untreated control population. When we looked at selectivity on our pickerel weed, we're in pretty decent shape. So again, this graph is set up just like that one. And we do have a number of treatments that reduce biomass by more than 50%, but that's okay because our two treatments over here, the 20 and 30% dolimonene, they reduce biomass, but not really at a super high level. So we've got good efficacy in our water lettuce. We've got good selectivity on our pickerel weed because those plants just weren't dinged up that much. Something that's also important to note is all three of the concentrations of diquat that we tested on both of these species completely eliminated all of the plant material. So that's sort of another gold standard. So what about with our mixes? Now, these are the mixes of acetic acid and dolimonene, and these go low acetic acid on the left all the way to high acetic acid on the right. And then within those, we've got the dolimonene concentrations. And basically, a lot of these did a really good number on water lettuce. They were really effective, and we got really good control from a lot of these mixes. We had decent selectivity from the mixes. So the pickerel weed was dinged up, but not really to a point where you'd be too awful concerned about it. So far, so good, right? So if we're looking for an 80 to 90% reduction in biomass, the treatments that are effective are pretty much any concentration of diquat, our treatments of dolimonene by itself at greater than or equal to 20% concentrations, and then a whole bunch of the mixes of acetic acid and dolimonene. So that's great. And hey, we've got selectivity too. This is another good thing. So we've got efficacy, we've got selectivity. So yay, that's a win for the team, right? We've got something that's efficacious. It kills our target weed. We've got treatments that are selective. They don't ding up our native pickerel weed too much. So we're done, right? No, no, sadly, we are not done at this point because remember that one of the goals of this project was to compare the costs of using these natural treatments to the synthetic sort of traditional herbicides. So to look at the cost comparison, we're going to start by looking at concentrations. FWC paid $35.50 per gallon for Tribune. And that might be quite a bit less than anybody out there paid because they do have contract pricing because they buy a lot. The acetic acid as 30% green gobbler can be gotten for $8 a gallon if you buy it in bulk. It's a lot more if you're buying it a gallon at a time, but we went under the assumption that if they were going to use these treatments in the field, they'd be buying large quantities of these. And the dolimonene, when purchased in bulk, comes in at around $32 a gallon. So that's all good and well, but we can't base our results just on the concentrate prices. We've got to talk about ready-to-use gallons because these products were applied at different concentrations. So we've got to get to the point where we can compare apples to apples and look at the ready-to-use cost. Remember earlier, I told you that $283,000 would rear its head again. Now, that was the amount of money spent in calendar year 2018 to purchase Tribune. And so that works out to around, close to 7,900 gallons of diquat purchased for floating weed control that year. If we dilute that down to 0.5% concentration, because in our experiments, 0.5% killed everything. So that's sort of what we're comparing this to. That would make around 1.6 million gallons of ready-to-use product, which comes in at a ready-to-use per gallon cost of around 18 cents. And when we look at our natural products, remember our 30% green gobbler vinegar, that was $8 a gallon, and our dolimonene was around 32 a gallon. Once we diluted that down to the concentrations that we used in these experiments, we've got a cost per gallon for each of those different concentrations. So far, so good. And just as a reminder, our diquat came in at about 18 cents per ready-to-use gallon. So what does that look like? For our diquat, if we're making 1.6 million gallons of ready-to-use product, 283 grand. These are our least expensive, effective treatments that we evaluated in these experiments. We want the cheapest one, right? I mean, we're trying to go real world here. So if you were going to use one of these treatments, you would probably choose the least expensive one. That comes in at just under $6 per ready-to-use gallon. So if we make that 10% acetic acid and 10% dolimonene mix that worked on water lettuce and didn't ding up the pickerel weed too much, and we made 1.6 million gallons of that, like we did with the diquat, our product cost goes up to $9.2 million from $283,000 for the diquat. So yeah, 32-fold increase in product cost alone, but that's not the end of the story. Not only is the product cost way, way, way higher, but there are going to be increases in labor costs, increased downtime, and then there's the question of PPE. So why will there be increased labor costs? Well, it's all about volume, folks. Let's say you've got a typical airboat, it's got a 100-gallon tank, and you're treating 100 gallons per acre. That means in a single day, if you treat 10 acres, you're going to need 100 or 1,000 gallons of ready-to-use mix. So far, so good. So for one tank, if you're using your synthetic product, in this case, that diquat, one 100-gallon tank is going to need 0.5 gallon of diquat. To use our natural treatment, the 10% acetic acid and the 10% dolimonene, that 100-gallon tank is going to have to be loaded with 33 gallons of that 30% green gobbler and 10 gallons of that 100% dolimonene. That's almost half the tank volume. And so for one tank, it's not that big a deal, but on a per day basis, that gets significant fast. A crew can go out in the morning and treat an entire day with 2 jugs of diquat if they're treating at 0.5% diquat. But to treat that same area with the natural products, they'd need 330 gallons of the green gobbler and 100 gallons of the dolimonene. Folks, that's 4,500 pounds or so without counting the cages and containers that these products come in. If you look at that boat there, does it look like he has room for another, 430 gallons of anything on that boat? No. So that means every time he reloads, he's going to have to go back to the dock and start fresh. And then there's the question of PPE. These products do not have aquatic use labels, so we're not really clear on the best way to handle them. If we look at our Tribune, that was our diquat source. It has a caution signal word. No herbicides are safe. Nothing's safe. Water's not safe if you have too much of it. But caution is a pretty low-level signal word. So in comparison, dolimonene has a danger signal word. It's an eye and skin irritant, harmful or fatal if swallowed. The 30% vinegar, good Lord, we're in a poison label now. Causes eye and skin burns. And I can testify to the skin burns. This stuff is pretty hardcore. And actually, I designated myself the mixer and loader for all the experiments because I didn't want the people in my lab handling this concentrate. It's pretty nasty stuff. So, we don't know about the PPE requirements. So if we go back and look strictly at the money, I told you I'd mention some of these other species again. With our water lettuce, we had a 32-fold increase in product cost. With water hyacinth, it was 47-fold. Salvinia, we had a 27-fold increase in product cost. And for Azolla, feathered mosquito fern, a 15-fold. So with all of these invasive plants, we were able to find treatments that use these natural herbicides and were efficacious and selective, but they are obscenely expensive. So the take-home message on the natural herbicide stuff is, yeah, some of them worked fine on water lettuce, but the materials are much more expensive. Labor and ground downtime is greatly increased. And it could have utility in some areas, but right now these are not labeled for aquatic use. We don't know a lot about their toxicity to organisms besides people. And we don't really have a good beat on what PPE would be required. So this is continuing research. We have a couple other species we're working on now, but the message on this is, well, those synthetic herbicides, maybe they're not so bad. The take-home message on water lettuce, as far as its native versus introduced status, it's honestly not that important. We practice maintenance management on this plant because it interferes with our use of the water and with Mother Nature's use of the water. We've got to be able to preserve the function of our waters. It's really important that we provide good ecosystem services to the other flora and the fauna that live in our aquatic systems, and water lettuce interferes with that. We also have to make sure we're preserving our use of the water. We need to be able to recreate in these systems, and we need to be able to store water safely and not have flooding during tropical events. And so we have to manage water lettuce to make sure that we're doing all of those things. And I hope y'all enjoyed that talk. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can actually see the chat. All right, so I'm looking in the chat, scrolling up. Okay, we've got that. Yes, numerous members of this from Dexter. Hi, Dexter. Numerous members of the ARACE are non-native weedy to invasive plants. Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yes, wild taro, pothos, duckweed, arrowhead vine. Yes, we do have a number of invasive species, a number of invasive aroids in Florida. Dexter's asking about samples of water lettuce through the state. I don't think anybody in IFAS has been doing that. If they did, I didn't know about it, but I know that Alan Dre and Paul Madeira over at the USDA have both been working on that. And I know Paul in particular has been doing a lot of molecular genetics work on plants, water lettuce collected throughout the state and throughout the Southeast. And I think there's just a lot of debate right now.
Lynn, Ian and I chatted a little bit privately, and he said, I guess there's a publication in the works, so I'm just going to hold out for that.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like a plan. And Ian is actually linked to a publication in the chat. So if anyone wants to check that out, there's a link to that in there. Thanks, Dexter. And John Herbert is asking about the impacts of these natural herbicides and combinations on fish or other aquatic or benthic organisms. John, my reply is that's an excellent question. We really don't know. It's nothing that's been evaluated. And one of the things I didn't mention is getting a product labeled for use as a herbicide takes many millions of dollars and many, many years. And dolimonene and acetic acid, they don't have a champion who's going to pay for these products to go through that evaluation process to get labels. And that's probably the only way those toxicity studies would get done. I do know that dolimonene in particular can be pretty toxic on aquatic organisms. And I think it's unlikely that either of these products would ever get an aquatic label at the use rates that we evaluated, because I think these rates would probably come close to killing anything with eyes. And that's one of the reasons we didn't test any submersed weeds in these experiments, because to get the concentrations high enough to cause plant damage, I think that it would be bad all around. I think we'd kill everything. So does anybody else have questions? All right, well, then I'll kick it back to Ginger and Paulette. Thanks for your attention, everybody. Send me an email if you have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gettys. We appreciate your presentation. We had over 40 people on the webinar, and I know that the information is going to be very useful, as well as it's going to be available on recordings in the future. So thank you so much for your time and sharing the University of Florida study. I'm going to just put Paulette on the spot real quick. And Paulette, are you able to get everybody's contact information, things like that?
If I'll have everybody's email address, and then if anybody is in need of a CEU, we are approved for aquatic, natural areas, forest pests, and demonstration and research. Just one hour's worth that everyone counts when you're trying to get 16 or 20. If you need the CEU, please let me know, put it in the chat or contact me directly. I'll put my email address in there, and I'll have to mail you the form once I sign it. And that would be about it. But yes, I have everybody's email address, Ginger, so we should be able to contact everyone after this.
Okay, well, I'll plan on setting up a follow-up just to make sure that those who need to get the CUs have my contact information to make sure we can connect with you. And like I said, your email's also in the chat. So thank you. I appreciate everybody for coming together today and participating in the North Central Florida CISMA's webinar. I do invite you the third Wednesday of every month to join us. If you're not on our list or distribution list, more than happy to get you on there. Also, join them and we build the IFAS distribution as well. They do a general meeting on the fourth Wednesday of the month, and we're the third Wednesday of the month. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.
Hey,
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
Did you have something, Dexter? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a question, but you probably can't answer it. You know, for FWC's upland invasive plant program, for generally species that are category 1 or 2, FWC will pay for there to be treated, say like on a state park or a state forest or a county preserve. But for the aquatics program, it's not like really a conservation property submitting a project for treatment, because really FWC is just treating lakes as public water bodies, and therefore I guess what I'm trying to get at, it doesn't really matter if something's category 1 or 2. Like you can have native cattail, but if it's, you know, obstructing boat traffic and recreation, I mean, FWC is treating it. So I guess I'm wondering, does it even, I mean, Lynn said it doesn't matter if this thing's native or invasive, but I guess it doesn't even matter if it's even really invasive ranked or not at the end, because right now it's category, can't remember if it's category 1 or 2, but it is it is invasive ranked, but even if it ends up being robustly native, like it's still going to be treated, I guess, and FWC will not have any qualms about treating it if I understand that correct.
Yeah, actually, Dexter, I'm still on and I can address that if you want. You're absolutely right. FWC treats anything in public waters that is interfering with the use of that water. So even if there was definitive evidence that water lettuce was native, FWC would continue to treat it. They treat spatterdock, they treat pondweed in some situations, they treat cattail when needed. Basically, their goal is to maintain the use of the water. The only real kind of fly in the ointment, as far as the native versus introduced thing, is the biocontrol work. But the actual management efforts, yeah, if it's misbehaving and obstructing the water, FWC is going to treat it regardless of whether it's native or introduced.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, Dr. Gettys. And I was going to turn over to Chris Bover, but I think he's already left. He knows very much those guidelines and policies for FWC treatment of aquatics. So he might be somebody for you to connect to, Dexter. He's within our CISMA.
I can maybe jump in here.
Oh,
I'm
hey,
not
John.
in the. Hey, Ginger, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to redirect that a little bit. The control done on water bodies is done through a combination of developed work plans with legislative guidance. We have like a tier 1, this is priority 1, this is priority 2, this is priority 3. I don't have that at my hands at the moment, but generally speaking, something that's blocking navigation will take a higher precedence than just something that is in the water. So in a case where a native species is completely blocking navigation, that would be where FWC IPM would address it in the most feasible way. If that native thing is a tussock of native plants, then we would harvest, move. It depends on the situation. Please do understand that there's a kind of a ranked process, and work plans are involved in that process.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I totally get that, where if it's like something you think a harvester go out once and the problem is solved for many years, that totally makes sense. Whereas like, harvesting hyacinth is, that buys you a few weeks.
I think it's a shame that there's not biocontrol work going on still, because if we're managing for water lettuce anyways, and if there's a potential biocontrol that's selective just to water lettuce, we could use that time and those resources that we're putting into water lettuce control to other invasive species. It's just a shame that they were working on it and they were close to it, and then it didn't happen because it was maybe native.
Something I would also want to caution everyone about biocontrol. There are actually very few biocontrols that are silver bullets. Usually the best we can hope from a biocontrol is that it takes the edge off. Probably the single best biocontrol example I can think of is alligator weed and the alligator weed flea beetle. That took alligator weed from one of the worst prior to Flepsy and Fisk now. Cat 1 invasives, alligator weed was terrible in the 60s. When the flea beetle was developed and introduced, when I say developed, I don't mean it was cooked up in a lab. It was discovered, and then discovered that it would not impact anything other than alligator weed through a long, careful process. And released, we found that it does a very good job of suppressing alligator weed. Fast forward to this century and air potato, we've now got 2 biocontrols for air potato, and they're both kind of ho-hum. They make some difference, but they haven't terribly moved the needle. We've got 3 biocontrols for Brazilian pepper. They haven't terribly moved the needle. You know, yes, biocontrol research is helpful, but I think in our industry, our vocation, whatever we want to call what it is we do, land management, we maybe still place a little too much hope on biocontrol. So
I'd agree with that.
Thank you, guys. We're right at 4 o'clock, unless there's another repeating question I have to ask right now. We'll go ahead and close out. I appreciate everybody being here, and I hope to see you on our regular calls. Thank you.